I'm not sure exactly where I stopped, but and on this 27th day of the said month, being the day of the date hereof, have, by the imposition of my hands and prayer, being assisted by the said elders, set apart the said Francis Asbury for the office of a superintendent in the said Methodist Episcopal Church, a man whom I judge to be well qualified for that great work, and I do hereby recommend him to all whom it may concern as a fit person to preside over the flock of Christ, in testimony whereof I have hereunto set my hand and my seal this 27th day of December in the year of our Lord 1784. Thomas Coke. Did I say, and also the 26th day of the said month, by the imposition of my hands and prayer, being assisted by the said elders, set apart the said Francis Asbury for the office of elder in the said Methodist Episcopal Church. What is that verse? It's in the Pauline side of the Bible. That talks about the three witnesses, 2 or 3 witnesses. So this is how they're enacting it. And remember, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints had a similar incident. Well, more dramatic of claims about that incident, but at least the physical side of it. At the opening of 1807, he rejoiced in what appeared to be perfectly restored health. His New Year's dinner was eaten under a roof of fragrant pine trees on the route northward from Sparta, Georgia, where he had held the South Conference some days before. The wide round of the year through the Carolinas, Virginia, the Middle States, and New England was but little varied from the experience of former years, except for a journey through the White Mountains, where he encountered snow in May, and an extended tour through the lake region of western New York, where Methodism was taking root. From this region he descended through western Pennsylvania, where he visited the 2 Moravian settlements of Nazareth and Bethlehem, the throngs to which he preached at conferences, at camp meetings, and in the open fields surpassed in numbers and interest those of all past years. He now estimated that there were more than 140,000 Methodists in the United States, and that the Methodist preachers were preaching to 2 millions of people. 2 millions of people. The entire population of the Republic was then computed to be about 5 million. Thus, nearly 1/2 of the people of the entire country were under the religious influence of Asbury and his itinerants. Such were the miraculous results of 35 years of labor. The Western journey was the year distinguished by the holding of a conference at Chillicothe, Ohio, the first Methodist conference ever held in that state, and the first ever held north or west of the Ohio River. From Chillicothe, the bishop pushed westward for a tour through the Miami country, and then southward across Kentucky and Tennessee toward his eastward destination. As he rode or halted for a brief rest, he was engaged in compiling an addition to the hymn book prepared for the American Methodists by Wesley in 1784. This was a congenial occupation, and at this time the freshness of his youth seemed to have returned. He exulted in spirit and reflected with satisfaction upon a tour that should next year add to his old itinerancy the province of Canada and the territory of Mississippi. But this was a dream never be fully realized. With a record of daily official cares, passing sorrows, and multiplying joys, the story of the tireless bishop draws itself on through the early months of 1808, and the General Conference was again in session. After 24 years of all but undivided responsibility in the episcopacy, Asbury was to have a real and in every way a competent associate in office. The General Conference of 1808 met, as had all its predecessors in Baltimore. It was composed of 129 members. Its leaders were men marked for destiny, and as administrators of the Commonwealth, they had shown with no less distinction than as the lawgivers of Israel. In the delegations were 5 men who afterwards became bishops of the church, namely William McKendry, Enoch George, Robert R. Roberts, Joshua Sull, and Elijah Heading. The time had fully come to settle the Methodism of the New World on a permanent constitutional basis, and the men here assembled were the men destined to do it. The church had now, in fact, but one bishop, and he was in sympathy with and wholly committed to the new ideals. Methodism was the most American thing in all America. It typed the restless American soul. Like the star of empire, its course was westward, and its motto, and like the spirit of empire, its purpose was conquest. Its motto was not only to keep pace with civilization, but to mark out a path for civilization, to be itself the creator and conservator of civilization. Its ideals and doctrines were a unity. It therefore only answered the law of its nature when it sought to preserve that unity and to prevent its ever-expanding forces from being dissipated through lack of regulation. The one answer to its one loud voice need was an enduring centripetal compact, a constitution. The organization of the church was completed by the writing and adoption of this constitution, the general body being formally convened and having had sundry memorials laid before it. Bishop Asbury called for the mind of the conference on the all-important matter. It was promptly decided that there should be a delegated general conference and a constitution to regulate it. Thereupon, a committee was ordered, and by the wise foresight of Asbury, it was provided to be appointed equally from the yearly conference, 2 from each, 14 in all. This committee appointed from its members a subcommittee of 3, namely Ezekiel Cooper, Joshua Sull, and Philip Bruce. I'm not sure how you're really supposed to pronounce that, but to draft a report. In other words, to write a constitution. Though not even these men realized the full historic significance of what they did, the subcommittee met, and it was agreed that each member should write a separate report. Cooper and Sulla made each a draft, but Bruce made no writing. When the 2 drafts were submitted, Bruce endorsed that made by Sulla, and with slight alterations it went from the large committee to the general conference, as then read it differed but slightly from the instrument which has subsisted for more than 100 years as the Constitution of Episcopal Methodism in its various families. The advantage which the strong central conferences enjoined in the old mass meeting assemblies, by reason of their nearness to the sittings and their fuller pastoral ranks, was a thing not easily to be given up. And at first there was a determined effort to modify the provisions of the proposed Constitution on this point. The sharp difference brought on by this issue at one time threatened a rupture in the body, and the New England delegation was asked leave to retire. A number of Western delegates also prepared to leave the sitting. A spirit of concession, however, arrested the disorganization, and the historic document was finally settled in the foundations by a strong majority vote. An effort was made at this time to put a clause into the Constitution making the presiding eldership elective, but it failed, and although many efforts have been made during the past century to alter the rule as then established, it has remained unchanged. It was no secret that Asbury desired the election of McKendry to the episcopacy, and the sermon which the rustic presiding elder preached before the conference was so satisfactory in spirit and matter that the delegates consecrated upon him with singular unanimity. Bishop Asbury says in his journal, "The General Conference elected dear Brother McKendry to be assistant bishop, but the old bishop was greatly mistaken in this. William McKendry was elected an associate bishop, and a bishop he was, every inch of him, and had his apostolate vindicated by signs innumerable." Well, that he was fit to run that church, really.